Hello and welcome to another video tutorial. In this video, we'll be looking at the part 2 of the advanced tracking setup for the radar builders. So where we left off before, we had looked at the scene scale and using visualize and inner culling zone, tracking bounds, and the use scene scale function. Next thing that we're going to do is, and it seems that we're going to have to go over to our part 3 for the advanced tracking for the radar builders. So let's just go ahead and start. So one thing that I did was I duplicated the enemies object here. So we have twice as many enemies now, and I rotated it, changed its position. So we'll have these enemy sets moving in different directions. We have more things to track. Now, as I said, what we're going to do is add base trackers and tracking lines to our 3D radar to make it look much cooler. So I'm just going to select this 3D radar here. I'm going to go to the blips area, and then for the enemy blips here, let's go ahead and fold these up for you. I'm going to start from the top. So under enemy sprite, we've set all the values here so far. You can set an order in layer for the sprite itself. We're going to leave this set to 1. If you need to change it, you can. Now we can look down here and we see that it says tracking line is inactive. We're going to go ahead and hit the power button here to turn it on. Then we're going to open up that fold out. Then we'll see a bunch of different functions down here. We'll see a material, a start color, end color, and scale values. Now, what's the tracking line and what do these all mean? Now, the tracking line it's really just a line that we're going to be drawing between the blip and the plane of the radar itself, so that you can visualize the Y position or height inside of the radar. So all the 3D radars come with a material called tracking line. You can design yours however you want it to look, but we're going to use the default tracking line material here. And let's take a look at what our sprite color is. So that's our sprite color. I think we're going to want, actually what we're going to do is we're going to make our tracking line color be a gray. And we're going to set the, we're just going to set it back to gray. And we're going to leave the scale at 0.02 here. It's the best scale when using this, when using the tracking line. And we can see that we also have this thing called a base tracker. Now we're going to go ahead and turn this on and I'll explain what this is. Now the base tracker is just going to be a sprite that's going to be placed at where your tracking line meets your radar plane, and that'll help you identify the point of contact between the tracking line, the blip, and the radar itself. So I'm just going to go ahead and turn it on and then open up that fold out, and just like we set up the blips, we're going to set up the base tracker. So I'm going to select a blip. I'm just going to select this sprite. Actually, I'm going to select this this one called blip 7. If I can click, there we go. And I'm going to give it, actually I'm just going to drag this up here really quickly. Oops, sorry. I'm going to drag this up here. All right, there we go. I'm just going to grab the eyedropper and select this. We want the base tracker to be the same color as the blip. And we're going to leave the scale at 0.5 and then give it the default sprite material. And then further down, we'll see additional options. And we're going to turn on always show enemy in the radar. So if the enemy passes the culling zone, the tracking bounds actually, it's going to be switched off, but we'll still see the blip inside of the radar. So we're going to turn that on. And we also have another function which I'll show you after we entered play mode again for the second time in this tutorial. So I'll show you at that point. Now we have this optimization options here. It's an optimization module. So we're going to open that out. And let me just fold these back up so it doesn't get confusing for you. So we're going to fold up the base tracker settings, fold up the tracking line, and then fold up the sprite settings here, and fold up the additional options, and only focus on optimization here. So currently it's set to recursive, which is a slow method of aggregating game objects. So this is constantly searching the scene for a game object, which is slow, as you'd assume. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use pooling. So if we use pooling, then the radar is going to be much faster. Since when you're using pooling, your intention is not to destroy your game objects, but to reuse and recycle them. In case you destroy your game objects, you'll need to call 3D radar or 2D radar dot do instance object check when you're adding the object back. And this will tell the radar to search for a new object and add it back to the pool. But you're not supposed to call destroy on your game objects, because that adds garbage to it. That adds garbage and can be slow. All right, you can also determine when you want blips to be removed or hidden from the radar itself. We can turn on remove blips when the tag's changed or when the blip is disabled. We're going to leave those off for now. We can also set pool size. So if we have, let's say 20 objects in our scene, we can just set the pool size to 20. And that those 20 objects will just be the 20 objects in our pool. But if we actually have 18 objects in our scene, but we have a value of 20 here, we can turn on recalculate pool size. That's if we don't actually know how many objects we have, or we're not really sure. Like for example, now I can set this value to 20 and then turn on recalculate pool size because I don't know how many enemy objects I have in the scene at the moment. And if I ran the scene, it would recalculate the pool size for me. But I'm just going to turn those off because I'm not going to be using them either. I'm just going to use the standard pooling here, which is pretty good as it is. Now, if you are using the recursive method, then you can turn on require instance object check. If you do that, it makes your recursive method fast, because this requires for you to call 3D radar or 2D radar dot do instance object check, a function which will tell the radar again to search. Once it searches and finds them, it stops, so it wouldn't be constantly recursive. All right, I'm just going to switch back to pooling here. And in the rotation and scale settings, we're going to, we're not going to use a static scale value. We're going to use a different one. We're going to turn on scale by distance. And what this means is that the blip size is going to change based on the distance of the center object or the player from the objects that you're tracking. So we're going to go with a minimum size of 0.05 and a maximum size of, actually we're just going to go back to 0.1 here. That may be too small. And we could also use custom rotation. So for each blip, their rotation, if we set this value to 5, then each enemy blip would have an X rotation of 5. But we don't want that, so I'm going to turn that off. We could use track rotation, which is a method which allows for the blip to mimic the rotation of the object which it's tracking, which can be quite useful if you're using prefab blips or mesh blips. And you can also freeze either the X, Y, or Z axis or all. Again, we're not going to be using track rotation. It's pretty self-explanatory, so I'll go ahead and just turn that off. we'll just be working with scale by distance. And just like that, we've covered all of the functions under sprite, the tracking line, additional options, optimization options, and rotation and scale. We'll take a look at the mesh and prefab blips a bit later on. Now we're going to go ahead and run this scene here. And we hope to see our tracking lines actually looking good. If not, we'll just open up the tracking line settings here and we'll play around with those to try to fix that up. So let me just pull this back down here. And let's take a look at our 3D radar. All right, looking good. So you can see that if we can get this thing to start moving around, we can see that now we have objects that have surpassed the culling zone here, but are still being rendered. That's because we've turned on always show enemy inside the radar. If we turn it off, then we'd only see the ones that are inside of the zone here. And we can see our nice little tracking lines and our base trackers working nicely. Now, what's also really cool about the radar builder is that, for example, we go ahead and we just select the radar here. We can rescale it, we can rotate it, and we just won't break it. So it's very sturdy. It just keeps on tracking. All right, so in the next video, what I'm going to do is cover a little bit more advanced functions. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.